Your numbers as a property developer are the single most important thing that you need to get right. My name is Ritchie Clapson, I'm a chartered structural engineer, and I've been involved in the property industry now over 40 years. And in this episode, I'm going to be telling you exactly why numbers are the most important thing for you to get right, and I'm going to tell you exactly how you get them right. Even more important, isn't it? Well, why are numbers important? Well, numbers are the key thing that drives any development deal. It's about making profit. We're not generally doing it for the love. You might be, but even if you're doing it for the love, you need to make profit out of these things. So profit only comes if we understand how the numbers stack up. That is so important. Let's have a think about the numbers. What are the numbers that we need? Well, what you're paying for it, that's your first number. Relatively easy to determine. You can work that out. There's an existing building. I'm going to offer a certain amount of money, and I determine what that offer is. Let's say it's £300,000. That's what I'm going to pay. Well, it's fixed, isn't it? It's unlikely to change. You're going to pay £300,000 for that building. You know your fees on top. There's going to be some solicitor's fees. They might change around a little bit. There's going to be some stamp duty. That's going to be determined. But that's it. It's £300,000. That's what I'm paying for it. Unless there's suddenly a surprise last minute and the vendor comes back and says, no, £350. It's not. Obviously, if you're at auction, be very careful if you go into an auction. Know your number at auction, just as an aside. The worst thing you can do is go into an auction and not know your top level number, without doubt. If your top level number is 300,000, you stop bidding. Because auctioneers, and one of my great friends is an auctioneer, are great at it. They're great at getting more out of you, getting that emotion, that passion into the auction room and making you spend more. And in fact, we're going to talk about emotion in a minute. So the first number, relatively easy to get right. What are you paying for it? In our case, it's £300,000. We can do this deal. We know what that number is. What's it going to cost to either build or refurbish? This is more difficult. This has now got lots of moving parts. What's in this? Well, we're going to have the build cost itself. The build cost in itself is probably the single biggest number in your deal analyzer. And it's the number that can make the deal work or not work. So we'll come back to that one in just a minute. You've then got professional fees. Professional fees, the consultants, the structural engineer, the architect, the cost consultant, maybe the project manager, maybe a landscape consultant, maybe a lighting consultant, maybe an acoustic consultant, a flood consultant, a civil engineer. The list can go on. There could be, on some projects, certainly some more complex projects, up to a couple of dozen individual consultants. So you've got to determine all of their costs at the start of a project. When I say the start of a project, we need reasonable estimates. How can we start a project if we don't know what it's going to cost? So we need to reach out to a certain extent to the industry, to the communities, and find out what they're going to charge us for this particular project. Now, if you think about this and you know how to do this stuff, you're going to know when you need a flood engineer or not. If you're in a flood zone, you're going to need a flood consultant. Then you can reach out and you can get an idea of the cost of that report. If you're not in a flood zone, well, the chances are you don't need a flood risk report. So we can ignore that one. If you don't have any landscaping, if it is an entirely contained site, just flats internally, maybe an internal courtyard, there's no landscaping. There's no landscaping consultant. Do you need an interior designer? Subjective. Depends where you're building. Certainly if you're building within the low end of the market, the entry market, maybe not. I mean, in some instances, an interior designer can make a big difference there. The higher end, the more likely you definitely want an interior designer. So you can get guidance, and if you understand this business, you know when these various consultants come in. But we need to understand professional fees. We also need to understand interest costs, because the likelihood is we're going to borrow a significant proportion of this money to do development deals. And even if you're not borrowing it, even if all of the money is yours, well, you need to know what interest you could have got putting it somewhere else, because that's an opportunity cost. If you were putting, let's keep it simple, £1 million of your own money into a development, you could invest that for 10% and you could make 100,000. So you've got to take that loss of £100,000 into account in your numbers. Equally, if you're borrowing all of that £1 million, you need to take that 10%, £100,000 for 12 months into account in your numbers. And also alongside that interest, there's often other fees. There's what we call in and out fees. Sometimes there's money, there's a fee to pay to actually borrow the money. There's also sometimes a fee to pay to give the money back. It's crazy, but yeah, sometimes you give the money back, you've got to pay them to give their money back. It's all part of the processing and the administration they've got to do. There's often broker fees. There's often reports that you need. So there's quite a lot of fees that you need to understand, all in and around that interest. What about the sales cost? We've got to sell these properties at the end. You need to understand that. What are we going to have here? We're going to have some estate agency costs. We're going to have some lawyers' costs, some property lawyers' costs. It might be that we're title splitting an existing building into individual flats, in which case we've got to separate all the titles. Let's say we're selling a dozen units. There's a dozen sale processes with 12 individual people that's going to buy it. That's all going to be processed by your property lawyer and indeed your estate agent. So sales costs are very important. And ultimately then, another figure alongside this is what's it going to sell for? That's very difficult, isn't it? How are you going to predict what you're looking at today and what it's going to sell for in 12, 18 months' time? That's another thing we need to get a handle on. And of course, everything revolves around that. So let's come back. We said there's three numbers effectively. What are we paying for the building? What's it going to cost to do it up, and what we're going to sell it for? The first one, straightforward. It's here and now. We understand it. The second one, that development cost, how can we get a handle on that? How can we work out what that is? Well, the reality is we bring in some expertise. And the reality is this is a staged process. At day one, you're going to be looking at this with a certain amount of estimate. You're going to be looking at this in terms of probably on a pounds per square metre basis. You're going to be looking at this with some estimates that you've got from a cost consultant for this type of building in this type of area from this type of condition to this type of end standard. So we're taking an old industrial building in and around the Oxfordshire area and we're turning it into entry-level flats. So we could understand roughly per square metre what that's going to cost us. But then we're going to move on and we're going to refine it. So in the early stages, when we're putting a bid in, that's what we might do. If our bid's accepted, we now need to get a little bit more serious. So what we're actually going to do is define our scheme a little more. We're going to start getting some layouts done, either yourself or with your architect. What's this room going to look like? What's this old office carved up into residential flats going to look like? How many new internal walls are there? How many new internal doors are there? What about skirting, architraves, kitchens? Is there a utility room? What about the bathroom? Is it a shower? Is it a bath? Is it fully tiled? Is it part tiled? Are the internal doors plain or are they oak? Are they solid? Are they hollow? Do you get my point? There's a whole load of specification that we can start refining. Not all at day one, but we're moving on from a square metre price ultimately to a breakdown and a detail price. That's the process we have to go through. And we've got to keep revisiting and understanding this price. But we need to bring in professionals, maybe an architect to help with the layout. Certainly as a developer, one thing you need to know, and all of our students do, is how to block plan, how to do that initial layout, how to take that existing office building and work out how many flats we can get in to that office building. That is so important. From there, ultimately, you might think once the offer is accepted, we're going to bring that architect in. And we're going to start refining and breaking down this build cost. So we're going to break it down, as I said, into walls, into kitchens, into doors, even into lighting. How many spots we're going to have in this room? Is it a pendant? And is it two-way switching? One over there is the door you come in, one as you go out. What's it going to be? Is it dimmers? They cost a little bit more. How many double plugs are we going to have? You can start working at refining that detail very early on yourself with a little bit of assistance from the professionals once you've got your offer accepted. So you can see that middle number is going to be starting to break down and get more and more and more concentrated and more certain as you go forward. That's so important to control that number. And constantly we are revisiting the numbers on the whole project. We're constantly reassessing our deal and understanding what's going on. We know our purchase price hasn't changed, but that middle price could be flexing around. And of course, then the end sell, how do we even attempt to get that sorted? Well, one thing which is so important is not to worry about the end price at day one straight away, because emotion will creep in. I said I'd talk about emotion. Now let me tell you that emotion will creep in even if you say it won't. Because what's going to happen? You're an existing developer out there. Maybe you're a new developer. You could probably picture this. Maybe you are a developer and you're desperately searching for a project. And you see so many projects and they come and they go and they come and they go and they're not suitable. Or you bid and you lose it. You bid and you lose it. I always say you've got to put 100 projects into your funnel to get one out the bottom. That's a lot of projects. But when you get that one and that offer's accepted, or you know it's potentially accepted, wow, are the emotions there? Do the emotions flood in? Are you excited? You're going to be, aren't you? This is the one. I've got it. I've got my 200,000-300,000 profit coming down the road. Wow, this is cool. I can tell you then what happens. And this happens so many times. People manipulate their own numbers to make them work. You're thinking, come on, Clapson, I'd never do that, but you would. And I've seen people do it because that's where the temptation, subconsciously, sometimes consciously, but mostly subconsciously, you'll end up manipulating your own numbers. And what happens? Do you know, I can go in a training room, I can sit there with my students and they come into their academy days, their developer club sessions with me. I can put a deal up on the screen and say, okay, what do people think about this area? And do you know, almost without fail, the new students, when it's their first academy day with us, when they're learning with us, they're part of their learning journey, they'll all go away and they go, hey, I've looked up 1-bedroom flats in this area sell for 175 to 195. They look at that end price, 175, 195. Yeah, that's what it's looking at. Why? Because it's readily available. They can find that information. It's easy. They can pin that down. A lot of people then start, they put that number in at the bottom. They go, okay, yeah, it's 5 flats. They're 175 each. This adds up to that. Let's make them 200 because I can do those numbers in my head. 5 flats, 200,000 each is £1 million. It's £1 million. Right. I've now got to fit everything in for £1 million. I know they want 300,000 for it. If I've got £1 million, I've got to take off 20%. That's 200,000. That's my profit. I'm down to 800,000. Right. Take off the 300,000 purchase. I've got 500. Everything has to fit into 500,000. It has to fit between those two fixed points. And so what they'll do, because a lot of it is estimates, a lot of it is guides. Oh, let's have a look. What do I think about the lighting? Yeah, think about this. And when they even sit there with a cost consultant, go, well, we'll leave that out. Take that out. We won't need doors. We don't have doors. Don't worry about the kitchen. We can come back to that later. I'm sure we can get those cheaper. And it's ludicrous sometimes to listen to it. And if you ever recorded it and played it back, people go, I didn't do that, did I? You did. You just subconsciously, you had these two fixed points and you tried to make it work. And what you did is you didn't do anything massive. You didn't say, forget the kitchen. We're not going to have a kitchen. You just took a little bit off of everything and you made everything a little bit unrealistic. And people do that. They manipulate their numbers to make it fit, consciously or subconsciously. So how do you avoid that? Well, the answer is that sell value, when you're working out your deal analysis, goes in last. You start at the top of the sheet. This is how we have devised our own deal analysis sheet that all our students work on. They start at the top. They've got rigid instructions on this, and woe betide them if they go off-piste. Start at the top. They put their purchase prices in. They then go down to the second stage, which is all their build costs. They don't even look at the bottom of the sheet. They're not allowed to look at the bottom of the sheet. I'm going to go around and visit them in the early hours of the morning if they look at the bottom of the sheet. Do you get my meaning? They've got to do those middle numbers first. Then they can look at the bottom of the sheet. Then they can look at the sale within the area. Now, of course, without any manipulation, they've put the purchase price, the build cost in, and if it doesn't work, now they can go back in a slightly different way. Okay, right. I put that appropriate amount in for kitchens and doors and walls and plugs and sockets. How am I going to reduce that? It's a slightly different approach. It's a more sophisticated, thought out approach. And you'll often bring your professionals in to help do that. So always think about putting your sell values in at the end. That's really important. And back onto those sell values. How do you understand those? Well, one of the big problems that we have in this industry, you're going to go out and probably speak to a residential estate agent. This is what most people who are uneducated, who don't know any better, will do. Now tell me, maybe you've done this. You go out and you speak to a residential agent and say, hey, these 2-bedroom flats I'm going to build, what are they going to sell for? Well, they're going to tell, we're going to sell those for about 250,000. Oh, wow. Yeah, they sell like hotcakes, those things, hotcakes. I mean, what sells like hotcakes these days? I don't think anything does. But that's what they say. Yeah, no problem at all. We're going to shift those. We'll have an open day. They'll probably all be gone. They are enthusiastic beyond belief. Now, we love that. We want that optimism out of our estate agent because our residential estate agent has got to sell these things. But that information is no good to us. It's too optimistic. It's too flaky. You need to understand the marketplace yourself. That's why we teach all of our students a process called market area comparison. We teach all of our students, all of our new developers, to understand the marketplace, do their own assessment of the marketplace, do their own analysis of the marketplace. And then, imagine this, if you understood the marketplace, you understood what 1 or 2 or 3 bed properties were selling for and the range, and you also understood how quickly they sell, because that's part of this process. And you went into that residential estate agent, says, hey, I'm thinking of building some 2-bedroom flats in and around this area. What do you think the prices are going to be? And they say 250. You'll go, that's interesting. Looking at my market area comparison report, they don't seem to go for more than 215, maybe 220 tops. Why do you say 250? And of course, now you're interrogating. And when that agent says, they're so like hotcakes, what do you mean hotcakes? Oh, within a couple of weeks, they'll be gone. Imagine when your market area comparison report says, well, it's interesting, Mr. Estate Agent, that you say they're going to sell within a few weeks. I'm looking at the average selling days is 30. In fact, some places are taking up to 90 days to sell. Where do you get your 14 days from? Now, how will that agent start responding to you? Hopefully with a lot more respect. And what will probably happen, they're going to break down that facade, that barrier, which they have to put on. It's their automatic facade. And I don't knock them for that. But that's what they were put on, and that will get broken down. Okay, yeah, interesting. Well, yeah, I mean, I say 250, but it's, I mean, that's probably what we put them up for, but we're more likely to get 230, maybe 225, and I'll show you some examples. And 2 weeks, well, we might get a couple gone in 2 weeks, but you're now going to get the truth. You're now going to get the honesty. You're now going to get more certainty around that end number. So as you can see, numbers are massively important. But how you get to those numbers is equally important. The process of analysing them, make sure you've got your purchase price, your build costs, before you look at your sale prices. Make sure your build costs are there with more detail, more meat on the bone than simply looking at a square metre price. And it's a process that you've got to refine as you go forward in the deal. And make sure you understand the market. All of our students do. It is imperative for you to unlock the other side, that hidden side, that sort of hidden, behind that hidden facade of that estate agent, the bit that you need. When they start breaking down and go, right, yeah, okay, yeah, this is what I think. So you to get that all-important sale value number, which you're also projecting, which could be 12, 18 months away from where you are now. So as you can see, numbers are so, so important, and get that emotion out of the way and just do it logically with a process. Hopefully you followed that. Hopefully that makes sense to you. And if it does, please like and subscribe, and then you'll never miss another episode. And of course, if there's any episode that you want us to do on any other subject, let us know in the comments and we'll do our best. See you in the next episode.